Michael, are estate and letting agents any good at their staff recruitment? Talk to me.
Staff recruitment. No. Let's use a phrase and say no, because most people start recruiting when they've got a vacancy. So they're under pressure. It's about putting a bum on a seat. They cut corners and they end up with a bum. Clearly, the best time to be recruiting is probably when you don't need to recruit. I'm sure the recruitment companies will tell you this as well, despite the fact that obviously they make their money out of recruitment. And I see so many poor processes. I know process is a bit of a theme of mine, but the interview process, 20-minute chat over a coffee somewhere. Oh, yeah, he's got a pulse. Yeah, you'll do. Whereas,
do you really think it's as bad as that?
Well, at an extreme,
yes.
To make a point. No, I think most people go through
40 minutes.
Yeah, 40 minutes and a coffee. People go through a bit of a, but I don't see how you can recruit somebody on one interview for a start. So I would always have a 2-interview process. Probably have somebody else involved in at least one of those interviews, so that you're getting another viewpoint. Years ago, when I was a director at Connells, we introduced psychometric profiling as part of our recruitment. I had an open mind about it. I'm completely convinced as to the value of psychometric profiling. Yeah, absolutely. You can create most of these things produce a sort of a graph or whatever in terms of, and you can ascertain what the right fit is for a particular role. For example, an administrator would be different to a lister, okay, clearly. Now, you'd know that, but how does it look? You can't hide from psychometric profiling. And if you got a psychometric profiling from somebody who you'd had a wonderful interview with because you both support the same football team,
yes.
and she's rather attractive or whatever the reasons are, you think, oh, well, I'll fit them into this.
Yes.
No. 3 months later, the what's-it hits the fan and it doesn't happen. So I think there's a lot more work that could be done there. And of course, the key thing is that if agents were looking after their staff better, they wouldn't need to do so much recruitment. I mean, the staff turnover I know the market's challenging and that's always doesn't help, but people mainly move job because of the way they're managed. It isn't, they'll tell you it's because somebody's offering them more money and bits and pieces, but it's usually because they don't feel valued, they're not empowered enough, they're not given enough scope. So it's how they're managed. And again, if agents put more, and indeed all businesses put more effort into that, I think we'd have less.
Have you got any top tips for that?
Yeah, I think going back to the Ken Blanchard 1-Minute Manager, I urge anybody who's not read it. It's only take you half an hour to read it, and I'm not selling copies, but that is a nice, simple management style. But the point is to regularly have dialogue with the staff. And so many businesses do not have a sit-down one-to-one with their staff in any way, shape or form. So there is no sort of scenario where they can have that dialogue, where the member of staff can come along and say how they think they're doing. So when they do take place, it's often the manager saying, you were rubbish last month, or well done, you had a great month. And it should be the member of staff coming and talking about themselves, so that you identify training needs. Sometimes people do need a kick up the backside, but sometimes they need a pat on the head and a sugar lump. So there's a lot more of that could be done. Biggest barrier to it, I always get told, we haven't got time to do that. Well, what better time? What better half an hour or hour could you spend in a month than getting somebody fired up, motivated, so that they run at the speed you want them to, instead of sitting moaning about them all month and then having the same conversation with them in a month's time. So athletes always work on their personal bests. People should be going home at night, looking in the mirror and saying, I worked really hard today, but I did this, this and this. So they want to come in again the next day. So people should always be looking to try and do their personal best, and they need help.
Sounds like the issue is us as managers, not necessarily our staff.
I think that we have a situation, and I know you're doing some work on millennials at the moment. And of course, I don't fall into that category.
Only just though, mate.
Only just, yeah. But the reality is that we have sent all of our kids to university. and therefore expectations have changed. They've come into the industry probably in their early 20s, all expecting to be the managing director 10 minutes later and this sort of thing. So there is that element. So we need to know how to deal with it. I personally came into the industry, I like to tell people, when I was 3, but I was 16, and it was almost an apprenticeship, and I did some studies while I went along, and that was a great way of learning.
Yeah.
And I think we could still do with more of that in the industry.
Definitely. Sticking little photos on.
Well, I mean, Chris, you're so much younger than I am. We had a Roneo Gestetner in the basement with a drum with a handle. So I go back pre-photocopiers, but there we go. So
It smelled lovely, didn't it?
grim. But the reality is that more effort into people, you'll get greater loyalty. I think the opportunity to give people better qualifications and whatever is there. If you're going to take on graduates, nothing wrong with that at all. It's a different expectation that you're managing, and they don't want to, in many cases, do some of the things that they would do at 18 or 20. So somehow you've got to wade through that. I haven't got an easy answer to it.
Well, we are going to be doing some videos in
Great.
the summer about how
I
to
shall
motivate.
watch them with interest.
We're actually going to interview some millennials and find out what motivates them. It's going to be fascinating.
Good stuff.
Michael, thank you.